in there. That's cool, man. Whatever.
I told you people don't like these.
You can.
She just said
Just stare at the camera for a whole class.
Just like look at
They don't need to watch the lecture.
you just caught looking at it the whole time. Just you're turned around and staring at it.
What is this one about?
Middle Ages.
Ages? Like a Middle Ages.
When medicine was
As long as it's
leeches.
not
That's,
about the last
Medicine
one.
with leeches. So,
C.S. Lewis. Is that a Narnia writer?
yes.
Yeah, right? Okay.
So C.S. Lewis is the writer we're actually going to be reading. But his thinking,
Can't stop Lewis.
rather he puts into modern terms that are easier to understand the thinking of a medieval writer named Thomas Aquinas.
Oh, yeah.
So we're shifting gears from the ancient world into the Middle Ages. And I chose a photograph of a page from a medieval prayer book as a way of sort of introducing the feel or the flavor of the Middle Ages. When you think Middle Ages, what do you think of?
The plague. Knights.
Plague, what else?
Knights.
Knights, yeah, knights in armor, that whole thing. What else? What was the dominant force in society and culture? Kings,
The English.
Christianity. Yeah, so it was a very religious time. And in other contexts, Islam. Islam in a different part of the world was on its ascendancy in the Middle Ages. So I chose a page from a Christian prayer book written in an ancient language. And it reads, Deus in adiutorium meum intende, God come to my assistance. Domine adiuvandum me festina, Lord make haste to help me. Those are the two opening lines of the daily prayer that you would recite 7 times a day if you were a monk in a monastery. People still do this. I'm lucky if I do it once a day. But if you were a monk in a monastery, people leading an intensely religious life, you would pray 7 times a day. So I kind of chose this as one sort of symbol of the Middle Ages because monks in monasteries preserved many ancient texts by copying and recopying these beautiful manuscripts by hand. So this is kind of, we'll skip over that for a minute. This is kind of our timeline of the Middle Ages. We'll come back to this. Or our timeline, rather, of the history and philosophy that we're examining. Again, we're kind of just looking at the highlights of the history of Western philosophy, roughly 2,500 years. We've spent most of our time in the ancient world, and these are the ancient philosophers whose thinking we've studied. We've looked at Greece, we've looked at Rome, Roman culture and thought with Marcus Aurelius. Now we're shifting gears into the Middle Ages. Most historians, many at least, break history down into these 3 periods. You're probably familiar with them. Ancient, medieval, modern. So I'll sort of talk about what are some of the overarching characteristics of medieval philosophy, a little bit about who Thomas Aquinas was with a few words about Al-Ghazali. Moses Maimonides was a Jewish philosopher. Al-Ghazali was a Muslim philosopher. So these are 3 great religious thinkers of the Middle Ages. A turning point, or a historical turning point that we can talk about is maybe around the year 700 or before, when the Roman Empire began to collapse and feudalism was on the rise in Western Europe. So the turning point may be 600 or 700 AD. And there are a couple of key figures at that time. St. Augustine was one of them. So the Roman Empire collapsed, leaving Western Europe in chaos. And the social and economic and political system of feudalism, kings and knights, was on the rise. And as we already mentioned, Christianity kind of became the dominant force. So in terms of architectural symbols, I like to think about the Parthenon, a Roman aqueduct, and the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris as a symbol of the Middle Ages. And the great Gothic cathedrals are great symbols for medieval philosophy because they bring together so many elements into a balanced and unified structure. And the arches and the buttresses enabled architects to do that. Medieval philosophy was trying to bring together many different elements into a unified structure. That was kind of the project of medieval philosophy. So one of those key figures who lived around the 400s, like at the time of transition from ancient to medieval, was Augustine. He's just an important figure to be aware of because he's kind of like a bridge from the ancient world to the Middle Ages. He was born into a family where his father was a Roman pagan, probably worked for the Roman colonial government in North Africa. I think it's maybe present-day Tunisia. So right along the north coast of Africa. He was African. His father worked for the Roman government. His mother was a Christian, however. So he was raised within Christianity as a catechumen, someone who's studying to be Christian but hasn't been baptized. So he was kind of raised in that. But he floated away from it, much like today's young people do. Many times young people today in the United States are raised within a religion, but then they float away from it when they become young adults. He did the same thing. He went away to law school in Carthage, which was a big city, kind of like going from Knox, Indiana to Chicago. And he partied. He was a party animal. And he and his friends experimented with different philosophies, which at the time a philosophy wasn't just a system of thought, it was almost like a social group, almost like a clique. People would come together and they would experiment with these different ideas. And he moved through a lot of those, but never really found anything that satisfied him. He got a job in Italy, but hated his job. And he not only didn't just practice law, he also taught rhetoric. Rhetoric is the art of public speaking. If you're a politician or a lawyer, you need to be a good public speaker. So his job is to teach politicians and lawyers how to speak well. And as he put it, he said, "Without lying, I taught people how to lie." That was how he summarized his job. I taught people how to lie. So he hated it. He became really frustrated with it. And when he was in the city of Milan, he met Ambrose, who was a Christian leader called a bishop. Ambrose was the bishop of Milan. So he met Ambrose and began listening to him preach and felt really drawn to this. And he also felt himself drawn to the philosophy of Platonism. So he read some of the same things we did, Plato's dialogues, and found himself drawn to them. And through Platonism, he found himself drawn back to Christianity, but in a more intellectual way. Not just, this is the religion I grew up with, but now this makes sense to me, through philosophy. So in a way, Augustine was the first truly medieval philosopher, and here's the key point. He was trying to bring together faith and reason. That is what the medieval philosophers were trying to do. They're trying to bring together religious faith with reason in order to make sense out of it. So it's getting past, yeah, this is how I was raised and I believe it, to this makes sense to me. It was Augustine's project. So when we're talking about the medieval world, we're talking mainly about Western Europe. So from Spain up through France, Germany, maybe Poland, Great Britain, Italy. So kind of this little teeny tiny corner of the world. Western Europe, it's a shift from the ancient world, which is focused more in the Mediterranean. So we're kind of shifting geographically as well as in terms of chronology or time, where we're the place in the world that we're looking at. So, again in the Middle Ages, just to repeat it and really make the point, Christianity became the decisive influence in society and culture and politics and literature and thought. This image I love. It's a picture from an illuminated manuscript of an event that took place around the year AD 800. So that's kind of another turning point to think about when you think about the Middle Ages. Charlemagne, who's basically a French warlord, had himself crowned emperor of an entity that he called the Holy Roman Empire. So there was this vision of a united Europe that was also Christian. It was the idea of Christendom, that society and religion are one. It's kind of the idea of the Islamic State that Muslims today have. They think a country should be Muslim. So that was the ideal in the Middle Ages. A country, this European empire should be Christian. So the Pope crowns him. The Pope puts a crown on this guy's head. So the image of a Pope, a religious leader, crowning a king, is the idea that God somehow gives kings their authority. And politics and church are very closely united. So this image helps me think about and remember, like I might put this in one of your quizzes. think about and remember the idea that in the Middle Ages, Christianity was such a decisive influence. So the theme, which I think is wonderfully symbolized by the arches inside of a great Gothic cathedral of the middle of medieval philosophy, is bringing faith and reason together into a unified structure of thought. So just hold that in your minds when you think Middle Ages. Faith and reason, unified structure. In the early Middle Ages, when the Roman Empire was collapsing and so society became more chaotic because there was no single authority controlling everything, kind of like Iraq today, monasteries became centers of learning. A monastery is a community where people, men or women, live a more intensely religious life. They're often self-sufficient. They farm, they garden, they make cheese or beer or bread that they sell. So the monasteries were like these little miniature economies, often behind high walls on top of a mountain. So they were well protected, and they were self-sufficient, so they didn't collapse into chaos, the chaos that was going on around them. Because of that, learning could flourish. Monks spent much of their time copying and recopying texts, including the texts of ancient philosophy, like Plato. So monasteries became centers of learning. Monks preserved texts and ideas. They spent most of their day praying, working, and studying. One of the founders of Western monasticism, Saint Benedict, is famous for the quote, "Ora et labora." It's a pun in Latin. Pray and work. So that's what a monk would spend their time doing, copying manuscripts. So they were preserving ancient literature. It's because of the monasteries that we still have much of the learning from the ancient world that then became our modern technology and science. So we owe a lot of what we have today to these people. In the High Middle Ages, later on, cathedral schools were centers of learning in the great cities. The monasteries were more rural and secluded, but there were also these cathedral schools in the centers of bustling towns where people were interacting a lot more with the society and culture around them. Those cathedral schools became the great universities of Europe. Oxford, Paris, Cologne, the first universities were outgrowths of the church. So here, religion was not so much secluded in on itself, it was interacting with the society and with the culture and with the diversity around it. And that gave rise to a school of philosophy called scholasticism. Put this in your notes if it's not in there. I only gave you one of those slides with that picture on it, so as not to waste paper. Scholastic philosophy came from the cathedral school. So just like we studied Platonism, Aristotelianism, Stoicism, Epicureanism, now we're studying scholasticism. It's like another form or branch of philosophy. And scholastic philosophy took the form of disputations. This is important because our reading is going to embody this. And you need to understand this in order to get what's going on in the reading. So a disputation is a form of teaching. This will take place in medieval classrooms, where the class would divide into two, and the teacher would throw out a question, and the students on one side of the room would answer no. The students on the other side of the room would answer yes, and they'd sort of have a debate. So they'd go back and forth giving arguments. And then the teacher would respond. This is another illumination from a medieval manuscript that shows a woman as the teacher, and the students is debating or disputing among themselves. So interestingly here, teaching took the form of arguments. It wasn't just a one-way street of teacher telling students stuff. It was people engaging in a debate. And then usually at the end, the teacher would jump in and sort of settle the question, or give the teacher's point of view. So again, just to reiterate, to beat it into the ground, the great project of medieval philosophy was bringing faith and reason into a unified structure of thought. That was not easy because faith and reason often seem to contradict each other. What are some of the ways religion and science seem to contradict each other today?
The creation of man.
Yeah. How are human beings created? The Bible seems to tell us one thing, science seems to tell us something else. Well, how do we resolve that? So they would answer, in fact, they addressed a question like this: is the universe eternal, or does it have a beginning in time? Because Aristotle thought the universe was eternal, but the Bible says there's a creation. So people had to sort of debate this and figure out, how do we solve this? So it was the idea that thought is driven by questioning. You're supposed to ask questions and look for ways to make sense out of things. So trying to bring together faith and reason into a unified structure of thought. Arab philosophers, and at this point, many if not most Arabs were Muslim. They converted to Islam from the 600s on. Preserved ancient texts and ideas that were lost in Europe, particularly Aristotle. So Muslim Arab philosophers made tremendous contributions to Western thought. They preserved those books, translated them into Arabic, and then they were translated into Latin so people in the West could read them. Arabs also gave us, what else? What else do we use that's Arabic?
Numbers.
Alphabet.
Numbers, yes. Our numbers are Arabic. Algebra is Arabic. Certain astronomical instruments are Arabic. The idea of doing surgery on a body is something that came out of Arab and Muslim medieval philosophy. Medicine is very important to Muslims. Many Muslim immigrants here are doctors. It's because they have that long tradition of the ability to do surgery. So Muslim Arabs made tremendous contributions to Western thought, and this was one of them. Al-Ghazali, Al-Ghazali, if I pronounce it in English, my Arabic is terrible. I try to pronounce it the way it's supposed to be, but I'm not good at it. He was an Iranian-born philosopher and theologian who went through that same process of questioning religion because of science. And he, kind of like Thomas Aquinas, tried to create a synthesis of faith and reason. So just be aware of who Al-Ghazali was. He helped to preserve some of Aristotle's texts, and within Islam, he was responding to some of those same questions, faith and reason, and how we reconcile the two. So Thomas Aquinas is the figure we're going to focus on. His writings are hard to read, however. If you really want to read them, I'd encourage you to, and I can give you some texts. But instead of reading his actual writings, we're going to look at C.S. Lewis. You still need to know who he was and what he represented. He represented that philosophical project within Christianity in the 1200s. So just be aware in general, he lived in the 1200s AD. So we are going way forward from Marcus Aurelius, right? He died around 180. We're jumping forward like 1,000, so 1,000, yeah, close to 1,000 years, a millennium later. So he was born into a noble family and he was thought of as stupid when he was young. But he eventually came to be known as the common doctor of the church, which means everybody's teacher. So today, within Catholicism, not so much other denominations, but within Catholicism, Thomas Aquinas is really highly respected. We look at him as one of our main go-to guys when we have questions about theology. He was educated as a young child in a monastery. I think he was the youngest in his family. So his family sent him to a monastery because they didn't have much property left over after they divided the inheritance among all of his brothers. But at the age of 19, he ran away from his family to join a new movement called the Dominicans. They were a group of men who tried to live a lifestyle following Jesus by living in poverty. They gave up all their stuff. They basically wandered around preaching. But they also became very educated. So ironically, this community of men who were actually very poor were educating the people whom they were training to be part of their community at the University of Paris. So he went off to Paris and he studied theology, philosophy and theology at the University of Paris. He sort of, if we compare medieval education to today, he sort of did his undergrad in philosophy and then his graduate study in theology. So he received degrees in both philosophy and theology, his master's degree. And in the course of his studies, he read Aristotle, which at the time was considered really cutting edge, because Aristotle says some stuff that's kind of challenging to Christianity, about the soul, about the creation of the universe, about God. For a time, Aristotle's books were banned by the bishop. The church didn't want people to read them. Thomas Aquinas read them anyway. So he was entertaining ideas that were a little bit controversial at the time. And again, his project was to try to make sense out of these questions. How do we bring together faith, represented by the Bible, with reason, represented by Aristotle? So that was his project. Trying to bring the Bible and Aristotle and other philosophers together into a single system that kind of makes sense. A creative synthesis of faith and philosophy. So again, what was the project of medieval philosophy?
Together faith.
Into a unified structure of thought. So you're gonna remember that when we walk out of here. That's gonna be an easy one. So that was a project. In his last and greatest work called the Summa Theologiae, which means like summary of theology, Thomas tries to consider every possible question that you can think of about anything. Most of it relates to religion, but some of it relates to the universe, to morality, to the human soul, the human person, and who we are. So he tries to consider every theological question that could be thought of. These are just some examples. Proofs for the existence of God. 5 proofs, those are famous. Whether the created universe is eternal. When it is right to go to war. Just war theory. We still use this today. It's taught at the military academy at West Point. So when is it morally okay for a country to go to war? Thomas Aquinas helped to develop that theory. What is the soul? What does it mean to lead a good life? And then, of course, particularly Christian questions like who Jesus was and what are the sacraments. And one question that people like to make fun of, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? Is that crazy or what? What do you think the answer would be?
What is it?
Kind of a trick question. An infinite number, since angels don't have physical bodies. So it's kind of a silly question. But it's one of those questions that just shows how many different kinds of ideas Thomas Aquinas was trying to bring together. So here's how a disputed question would work. Students would debate the pros and cons of a particular issue. So they would quote authoritative sources to support their ideas. They might quote Aristotle, they might quote the Bible, they might quote another philosopher, but they'd also make rational arguments, syllogisms, to explain why you think what you think, or why something makes sense. The teacher would then give a response. So again, back to this picture. One side would argue yes, the other side would argue no, and then the teacher would say, okay, here's the answer. So they were usually yes or no questions. Like, is it okay to torture someone if you need information? We talked about that right on the first day of class. So moral cases could be debated that way. Is there a God? Does God exist? This is one of the questions Thomas Aquinas answered. Is there a moral law? Is there an absolute right and wrong that's true for everybody? Or is morality just what you make of it? That's a hard question, right? And that's the question our reading is going to address. So our topic is the natural law real? So we're going to talk a little bit about what this means, and then we're going to get into the reading, actually read a little bit of it, so that you guys can then go off and hopefully do your first post tonight, right? So we'll read just a little bit of it at the tail end of class. So the idea of the natural law is the idea that there is a real right and wrong, that there's a single set of moral standards that's true for everybody. And Thomas Aquinas was debating this question. Some people think it's true, some people don't. A couple of terms that are important to know about. The word lex means law. A law is something you ought to do. Where do our laws come from?
Society.
Let's be more specific. Okay, some of them come from the government, and there are multiple layers of government, right? From your city all the way up to federal, all the way up to international law. Some just come from society. Society kind of tells us what we can and cannot do. It's really, really tacky to yawn in someone's face. But there's no law against it. Society tells us that, right? If you're yawning, you cover your mouth. But that's just a social custom, so it's still a law. And then there are other laws that we think of as basic human rights that might not be written down somewhere, but we respect them. So a law is something you ought to do. Use or right is something you're permitted to do. And there's a difference. If we read the philosopher Thomas Hobbes, those two terms will become important. You study paralegal, right, Liz? Do you bump into these?
Not really, no.
Some Latin terms are still in use in law today. I'd be interested to know what you do bump into on a daily basis.
I find them knowledge.
Okay, so this is the guy we're going to talk about. C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia. Who mentioned that book? Or who knows about The Chronicles of Narnia? Has anybody else read it? Anybody know what it is? So he was the author of the stories. They're wonderful stories, they're children's stories, but they're basically allegories. But he himself has a story. He grew up loving mythology, like ancient Greek mythology. He just kind of steeped himself in those ideas, reading the stories of the myths and making up stories, especially about animals. So that idea of talking animals goes all the way back to his childhood. but he fell away from religion in his youth. I think it was partly because he lost his mother. His mother died. He became an atheist for a long time. And at some point he experienced an intellectual conversion. In other words, he became drawn back to Christianity because it started making sense to him again. And he writes about this in his autobiography. Many people convert to a religion for emotional reasons. Like they marry someone who's Catholic, so they become Catholic, right? Or they have maybe some type of dramatic, miraculous experience and all of a sudden believe in God. C.S. Lewis wasn't like that. His conversion was really intellectual. He was drawn back to Christianity because it started making sense to him. He was friends with J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote what series?
Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, which is also a Christian allegory if you look at it really closely. So they had this little group called Inklings at Oxford University. They would write stuff and discuss things. So he was part of that circle. The Case for Christianity is a short little writing that we're going to read part of. It's based on a series of radio talks that he gave during the Second World War. Now imagine being in Great Britain during the Second World War. It's easy for us to look back on that because we know the outcome. But imagine being on the edges of a massive war that's being fought almost on your borders, with an enemy that's threatening your country and bombing your cities like every day, and you have no idea the outcome of this frightening situation. That kind of swirls in the background with some of the reading, like he'll make references to the Germans and to the war and to various things that are happening. It's not a lot, but just to know that he's writing in that context. And I think in that type of context, it sharpens one's sense of good and evil. And you'll definitely see that coming out in his writing. So these were radio talks that he gave, broadcasts. And people would write to him or maybe call in and ask him questions or argue against him. And then he would respond. So what we're getting is not only the talks, but also the arguments against his position, which he will summarize, and then his response. So what you're seeing in this reading is actually a form of the disputed question. And I'd like us to look at a little bit of it so we can start to get a feel for the genre of this reading and kind of how you need to think about it as you're going. So did everybody get the handout, C.S. Lewis, The Case for Christianity? Let's just do a little bit of reading before I let you guys get out of here. I'll start, and then maybe we can have a couple volunteers pick up.